Okay, let's jump right in. We're looking at the situation in October 2025. And after 2 brutal years of war in Gaza, we've arrived at this incredibly critical moment. The most important peace talks in years are actually happening. But, the path forward is anything but clear. Let's break down what's going on.
This quote from Al Jazeera just perfectly captures the bizarre and frankly terrifying reality of this moment. Think about it. At the very same time that these high-level peace talks are happening in Egypt, the fighting on the ground hasn't stopped. It's this strange, high-stakes world of simultaneous diplomacy and open warfare. So this brings us to our first section. We really have to unpack this tense backdrop for the negotiations. You've got these high-stakes talks happening in Egypt, with the US, Qatar, and Egypt itself trying to mediate a deal.
Yeah, it's like you're watching two different movies at the same time. On one screen, you have this intense, delicate diplomacy. They're hashing out a huge 20-point peace plan. But on the other screen, it's the grim reality of continued airstrikes and ground operations. It creates this incredibly fragile situation where, any progress made at the negotiating table could just be blown apart by something that happens on the ground.
But to really get why these talks are so urgent, we have to zoom in and look at the sheer human toll of the last 2 years. The numbers are just staggering, and honestly, they paint a very, very grim picture. Let's start with the total reported death toll in Gaza. Over 67,000 people. It's a number that's almost impossible to wrap your head around. But to really understand the impact, we need to dig a little deeper and see who these victims actually are. And when you break it down, the picture gets even more devastating. This data, which comes from the Gaza Health Ministry, shows that more than half of the identified fatalities are women, children, and the elderly. Human Rights Watch reported something that just sticks with you. On average, the equivalent of an entire classroom full of children was killed every single day. And look, the direct casualties, that's only one part of this horrific story. What we're really talking about is a wider societal collapse. International organizations have confirmed there's a man-made famine taking hold. The UN thinks more than 10,000 people are still missing, probably buried under rubble. And the healthcare system, the one thing you need in a crisis like this, it's basically shattered. Now, of course, this conflict has also taken a huge toll on Israel. Reports from Israeli sources show that over 1,152 security personnel have been killed in these 2 years of fighting. And this quote, man, it just says it all, doesn't it? It reminds us that behind every single one of these numbers is a real human story. An investigation by the Associated Press found 60 different families where at least 25 members were killed. We're talking about families that have been wiped out, sometimes across 4 entire generations. Okay, so with that devastating context in mind, let's shift gears and look at the diplomatic side of things. What exactly is being put on the table in Egypt to try and end all this? So at the heart of these negotiations is this 20-point plan. The framework was apparently initiated way back during the Trump administration and is now being pushed hard by the US. The full details are secret, of course, but sources tell us these are the core pieces. A ceasefire that happens in stages, a big exchange of hostages and prisoners, an Israeli military withdrawal, and then a plan for what comes next in Gaza. So, sounds pretty comprehensive, right? Well, what's holding it up? And this is where we hit the wall. It's the massive gap between what each side sees as an acceptable end to the war. Israel is laser-focused on its security, they want Hamas fully disarmed, and they want to keep security control over parts of Gaza. Hamas, on the other hand, is demanding a complete end to the military presence, international guarantees for their autonomy, and, this is the big one, a permanent sustainable ceasefire. So that's the deadlock inside the negotiating room. But what about all the pressures from the outside? Let's zoom out again and look at the major forces, both internal and external, that are going to decide if this whole fragile effort actually works. Now, this is fascinating. You can see this major split forming in the international community. According to CIPRI, while the U.S. has continued its strong military support for Israel, some of the major European powers, Germany, Italy, Spain, they've put serious restrictions or, in some cases, total embargoes on arms transfers. That's a clear sign of growing international pressure. But it's not just about international pressure. Both sides are dealing with huge challenges at home. In Israel, Prime Minister Netanyahu has to deal with his right-wing coalition partners, who are dead set against any deal that leaves Hamas with any power. Meanwhile, inside Gaza, there are reports of chaos and infighting, which would make implementing any deal really, really difficult. And hovering over all of it is the constant, intense pressure from the families of the remaining hostages, who just want their loved ones home. So at the end of the day, it all comes down to this single question. You have trust at an all-time low, and everyone remembers all the other ceasefires that have fallen apart. The real takeaway here is understanding the massive challenge of bridging this gap. Not just the gap between the negotiators, but the gap between simply stopping the violence for a little while and actually resolving the core issues that keep fueling it. And right now that gap, it remains dangerously wide.